Hello, everybody. Welcome to the As You Are podcast. My name's Leslie Vandergenst. I'm the founder of Enso Coaching and Consulting, and we're here for another episode of Unplugged.
Unplugged.
With Adam Roberts, the Adam Roberts, who, if you don't know Adam Roberts, you are missing out. This man is a treat.
Well, I don't know that "the" needs to precede Adam Roberts, but
that's
I'll
fine.
take it.
Adam Roberts.
Unplugged.
Unplugged. Here we are.
Indeed.
Well, how are you, Adam?
I'm well. How are you, Leslie?
I'm good.
It's always a good day when I get to come here and talk to you and Kathleen and Libby and anyone else who's sitting on these couches.
I know, it's just so fun. It really is fun. I mean, it's been such a treat to get to spend more time with you and to get to learn more about you. And, you know,
it's like a self-care when we come here.
It really is.
I always feel better when I walk out the door.
Oh my gosh, me too.
It's a nice day.
We learn from each other. We learn from other people. We learn from ourselves sometimes,
Exactly.
you know? I was thinking, we were kind of like, what should we talk about? We should just banter and like see what happens. Cause, you know, I feel like we can talk. But, you know, one of the things that I was thinking about you specifically when we were kind of coming in here and talking about doing this Unplugged thing was, the way we met was through musical theater, not through coaching, surprisingly.
Yeah.
And
I think that's true for the way I met all of the people on the team.
Yeah, exactly. Libby and I worked together, but we knew each other through theater, you know, strangely. I remember you telling me, or maybe it was through, I don't know, maybe it was through social media, but very specifically, like, you know, be aligned with your voice, like whatever, the way you sing, the way that you interpret a song, the way that you engage, like how to keep that as authentic to you versus like attempting to try to sound like somebody else. And I feel like I had, you know, voice teachers in the past that, you know, would always be like, here, like, try to make this sound like this or do this in this particular way. And I lacked a lot of confidence as a human, you know, trying so hard to kind of make my voice fit into a box. And, you know, I just very specifically remember those words coming out of you and me feeling a completely different shift around how I was going to perform, how I was going to sing, recognizing like I can always be better and I can always tweak and all of those other things, but at least creating some kind of a center was like a huge deal for me. And I don't know if I've ever told you that. So I just thought I'd just come out the gate with a little bit of a gratitude moment with you, you know?
Well, I appreciate it. I do. And I think that this is something that I have encountered as a voice trainer and as a vocal coach, and also as a musical director, which is kind of separate from those things in a way. I think that it can be very easy for us to think that none of Adam should be in this performance, or none of Adam needs to be on this album, or none of Adam, and almost creating this other entity instead of putting yourself into what it is that you're doing. And it's happens sometimes in the acting world too. A lot of people will say, well, I chose to be an actor because I can totally become someone completely different.
Right.
And of course, we know that those folks who are the people who are those fantastic actors that we always talk about always have a large part of themselves in the performances that they give. And I think that the same is true for vocalizing and singing. And even when we're giving presentations, when we're doing any kind of thing that involves our voices, there is a really great essay that Roland Barthes, who was a philosopher, wrote called The Grain of the Voice. It's a real short essay. And I often think back, it's very like academic and philosophical, but I often think back to that concept of the grain of the voice. And am I perceiving the grain of that individual's fingerprint in whatever it is that they're doing, in the song, in the performance, in the keynote, in whatever it is? Is that grain of the voice, that fingerprint evident?
Right.
Because that's what makes something so special and unique.
So true.
And
so true.
We're all piggybacking on anybody who's come before us.
Exactly. So there's no new creative anything.
So it's already going to be there.
Right.
And that's awesome. So we're already paying homage to those people that we love and listen to, because there's no way that we're not going to be massively influenced by the people that we love and listen to 100%. As artists, or that we watch give talks and keynotes or facilitate a meeting or anything like that. That's all going to be in our background anyway.
Right.
So why not then
like why
bring ourselves?
yeah, like
Exactly.
block it.
No
or be like,
need to
"Ooh, I don't
distance
want to
that.
sound this
No.
way," or I want to, I mean, and I mean, what is the I cannot remember where this quote is from, but art imitates life, right? Like
Art
that is
imitates
like
life.
the foundation of it. And it's just so interesting, because I think from I mean, I go to like 18 different thoughts, which is why you hear me pausing, but which is per usual. But I do think about like in, even in business, when you're thinking about like, how do I want to show up as a leader? How do I want to be a founder of a company? How do I want to be a vocal coach through speech or through music or through a number of different things? And it's so easy to get caught up in like what's happening around us and like imitating the things that are around us, because we're seeing success in all of these different facets that you can just get lost. Like it is so easy for a human to get lost in the noise, because there's so much noise, Adam. Like you and I are a little bit older. We're still pretty youthful, but like
Depends on the day. But sure.
but like the noise of social media and the noise of having access to all these perspectives and viewpoints, it can be jarring as a human. And like I use like singing for me as like a quick metaphor, but that is like an accurate depiction in so many different, like what kind of a mother am I going to be, and like what kind of a business owner, and how do I coach, and how do I support my friends, and how do I be a good wife? Like there's a multitude of different facets. And if we're not like authentic to ourselves, if we're not centered in some way, shape, or form, we're just, I don't know, pieces of paper flapping in the wind.
Well, I do think that's so true. I was thinking as you were talking back to, I did my graduate work in music theory many moons ago. And I remember.
Really?
Yeah. And I remember.
He's a music theorist.
That's why your husband and I
you guys
get
are
along
like
so well.
Besties.
At the weddings when we go off and talk music theory.
That's a party I want to be a part of.
Right, is it though? But I remember really distinctly, because this was something that stayed with me as I, would think about how I was going to coach and work later on in life with folks, was that there was this concept, and it was called the intentional fallacy. And I'm not going to remember who came up with it. It was in some seminar back at Florida State, where I went and got my master's, that we discussed this. But it was this concept of the intentional fallacy. And as I remember it, which could be inaccurate, but what I took from it that helped me later on was that the concept of intentional fallacy was almost the idea that, or the vice that we can carry around as artists, that we're not going to create something original. Mm. This idea that that we are incapable of creating something that is organic and original, because it must already have been created before. And so where is the intent in that? And that's sort of the idea of the fallacy. And I really think that what's interesting to me in that is, I always think, and I'm going to go on a tangent for a second here, because it is what's interesting to me in this. I think that there are, in the artists' world, I always have thought that there are two kinds of sort of artists at the baseline level of the pyramid of artistry. I think that there are people who fall more toward the passion of creation, and people who fall more toward the passion of interpretation.
Interesting.
Myself, I was always the latter. I was always someone who fell much more toward the passion of interpretation. People always say, well, what do you like? Have you written musicals? Have you written compositions? And I mean, you do a little bit of that in school because it's part of the requirement, right? As it should be. But that was never where my heart was. And I often say that I think, were it not for music in service to other art forms or purposes, or the voice in service to other means of storytelling or communication, that I probably wouldn't have stayed doing what it is that I do. Because, for me, I was a piano principal because every music major has a sort of a principal instrument, even if you're not a performance major. And, being a keyboard principal, I always knew that I was not interested in sort of being a concert pianist or anything like that. That was not where, and that is also very interpretive, by the way. So I'm not saying, I guess that's splitting hairs a little bit talking about interpretation, but I always knew I wasn't interested in being a composer. I was very interested in doing orchestration and arranging. So taking what someone else had written and helping them to flesh that out, almost like coloring,
reimagining,
instead of creating the coloring book pages, right? And I think that is so true, not only in singing or in music or even in being an artist. I think it's true for a lot of what we do in our work lives in general. I think some people really lean into the idea of entrepreneurship and creating something that is going to fill a need that they perceive is not being fulfilled in the world in some other way. And I think some people really lean into, how do I take something that already exists and interpret it in a different way to fulfill a need? And both get you to the same place. But I think for me, a big part of what I talk with my clients about, regardless of whether they're in the business world, in the legal world, in the singing world or performing world, is if we're going to set some concrete goals for our work, which I think is really important before we get going with it, or soon after we get going with it, where are we going to kind of hone our vision, at least for now? It doesn't mean it can't shift, and it very well may. We should be open to that. But are we looking at something that is more in the element of creativity, 100%. Or more in the element of interpretive creativity? And I think that there are people who become critics and dramaturgs and even directors who are not necessarily interested in being the screenwriter or the playwright.
100%.
And that doesn't mean that those two things can't happen also in the same person. And they will, to some degree, in every individual, obviously. But I think that's something we don't think enough about sometimes, is that particular dichotomy of where we fall, because creativity is such a broad word. And it doesn't always have to mean creation from scratch. It can mean interpretation and interpreting. I think this is probably a cliche example of this, but 3M to me would be an example of a company that I think of as a company that has said, we're going to take things that already exist and figure out how to spin them in a way that people may not have thought about. And thus they create new things, but built on the back of something so that's to me an example of a perhaps more interpretive facing mindset going into that kind of thing in the business world, for example.
Totally. Well, and it's so interesting when you're talking about rearranging or reorchestrating a piece that already exists. I think, the thing that immediately hit me when you were talking about that is I was thinking about our role as coaches, which is a lot of times is to take, a concept, an idea, an intention, a direction, and the artist, i.e. our client, our business client, might be stuck in that moment. They've got an idea of where they want to go, but their capabilities are not quite clear enough for a distinct direction, or they don't have the resources to get to the next phase. And so our job as coaches is to kind of be a rearranger, is to say, okay, you've got this major concept, you've gotten this far, how do we take it to the next levels? Here are a couple of tools that we can engage in, or here are some things that we need clarity around. And sometimes even just, and I think, we're always on the same page on these kind of things, Adam, is sometimes just asking those questions causes immediate clarity around what the next direction is, but they don't have somebody to kind of help facilitate or help them rearrange or reorchestrate a piece that may already exist inside of their mind. So it's just an interesting analogy because they're all so closely wound together,
And I think another analogy for that, which I somewhat hesitate to make only because I think there's a misperception publicly about what directors often do.
Mm-hmm.
People always say to me, oh, I'd love to be a director because I'd love to tell people what to do. Well, most directors do not want to tell people what to do. They want there to be a collaboration. I'm talking, of course, in the acting, the theater world, the film world. But what I think is interesting is that for me, when people say, well, what's the difference between an actor and a director? In a way, I think that both parties are equally going for a shared common goal. But as an actor, you literally cannot experience what it is that your audience is experiencing. There must be someone who is outside of you to give notes. It doesn't mean that the director is telling you, you must do this and this is what you must do.
Right.
But there needs to be a collaboration. I think of coaching in many ways like that kind of a perception of a director, neutral third party who can literally look at what you're doing when we are not capable of looking at hearing, sensing what it is that we ourselves are doing.
Blind spots. I mean, it's just
blind spots.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Even people who write their own one-person pieces that they're going to perform, they wrote it, everything, usually have a separate director.
100%.
Because that is just, you're right. It's your rear view mirror. It's your side view mirrors. It's the things that we need to have. And that is how I see coaching and the client relationship as a collaboration for
100%.
Things that you couldn't possibly know were there yourself.
It's 100% a collaborative relationship, and the goal of the coach is the goal of what that person wants or is desiring at the end. And that neutral third party is, look, I'm 100% bought into where you're going. However, this, we might need to explore a different way of going there, or the result that you're indicating you want might not be the thing that we're actually getting. And so we have to be a collaborative, neutral third party. There's no agenda for the coach other than for you to get what you want. So again, when you're in it's so interesting because I was actually having this conversation with a client this morning. And the difference of being kind of outside of the business is I have no obligation to anybody but the client. I have no obligation to the business. I have no obligation to the political tap dancing thing that happens inside of an organization. I have the only agenda that I have is to help you achieve whatever your goal is. And so hopefully the conversations that we're having, the questions that I'm asking, the clarity, the direction that you want and intend to go on is going to get you to that goal faster than what you can do on your own. Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and I think also by extension of everything you just said, going back to, when folks come in for a vocal coaching session, sometimes they have really specific things that they know they want to achieve on a very specific timeline. Very frequently, they have no idea what we might even do in this work together.
Right.
They don't necessarily know, sometimes even if they want to focus more on their speaking or their singing voice. And one of the things I think is so cool and admirable is when I think it's equally cool and admirable when someone comes in and does know, here's my list of things, here's the timeline I have, it's for these projects. That's awesome. But on the other side of that spectrum, I think it's equally cool and admirable and very courageous for someone to come in and say, I just hate my voice. I just hate my voice. I don't know what that means in terms of what I'm going to do about it. But that's why I'm here to see you. And that's all they know. Yeah. And there's a term for it. It's vocal confrontation. There's a term for someone hating the sound of their own voice. It is so common. There was a research study done. I think it was 2005. There was this research study done that what they did was they took individual people who were voice users, occupational voice users, and then they took people who were clinicians, so like speech language pathologists. And there's this instrument that we sometimes use to sort of quasi-objectively rate different parameters of the voice. It's called the Gerbus. And that stands for, the G stands for grade, which is just sort of the average of the other four variables. Roughness, breathness, asthenia, which is weakness, and strain.
Mm.
So that's kind of the down and dirty, quick instrument that you can listen. I'm usually listening for those things when I talk to somebody for the first time, just getting to know them, kind of listening for those 4 parameters. And so what they did was they asked the voice users to rate themselves on the Gerbus parameters, and they asked the clinicians to rate those same voice users using the Gerbus. And what was really interesting was, across the board, voice users themselves rated their voices at a very significantly harsher, in a very significantly harsher way, detrimentally than clinicians who had actually been trained on this instrument. So we are much harder, this research study says, on our own voices than even people who are listening for pathology. And most people will not have a pathology of the voice.
Yeah.
So this is not just something we think happens, that we are hard on our own voices. It's backed up by research.
Oh, it's so real.
Yeah, it's so real. And so when people come in and that's all they have for me to start, I hate my voice. Go. I think that's so courageous.
Yeah.
And it's a fun challenge to go on that journey with folks. And it's part education, it's part hard things like having those folks listen to their voices in very intentional ways. Get up and give a presentation or get up and sing for the first time in front of other people. And there is a whole process that is tailorable to the individual. But it's just amazing to me how often I hear this from people, more often than not, I would say. You know, it's the stereotype, it's the archetype of the diva who loves their own voice. I would say, in my experience, more often than not, people don't like their own voices. Even singers, you know, there's something they don't like about it. Sometimes they can identify exactly what it is. Sometimes they can't. And so it's a little bit of being a detective. It's certainly about being part of a team because, you know, being in a city like Austin, a large city, is so beneficial to being part of a voice care team where we have awesome laryngologists, awesome voice specializing speech language pathologists, awesome nutritionists and psychologists, and all of the folks that we would work with as part of a voice care team to support an individual's goals, whether they want to be professional singers or whether they want to be people who can support their voice in use in the home or in the workplace in another way.
Yeah. Oh, it's so interesting. You know, I immediately, when you were talking about like singers or people who are speaking and they, you know, they focus in on like the things that they don't like. You know, so much of what we do as humans naturally or instinctively is we hyper focus, regardless of if you're like a big picture person or if you're like a futuristic person or whatever. We'll find like the fault, hyper fixate on the fault, and then blow that thing out of proportion. So then the whole performance, speech, etc., becomes like hyper fixated on that tiny thing, when as an audience member, when as somebody who's engaging in what is like what the speech is or what the purpose of the talk is or the, you know, the vocal performance per se, is taking in the entirety of that performance rather than the one blip note or the one, you know, flat note or the one like whatever.
Lyric going
bumble.
up on a lyric. That's the thing that people always, oh my gosh. Goodness. And they will just beat themselves
and
up over
nobody
it. And
will
nobody
remember.
knew. Nobody
they
even
will never
knew it
remember.
happened.
And I think similarly, a majority of my clients, especially in the executive and leadership space, have imposter syndrome, where they've created a reality around a situation, a circumstance that occurred. They're people pleasers. They want people to like them or to enjoy the work that they do or to respect them in a certain way. And they've hyperfixated on one situation, one scenario, one comment. And that has become so much of a driving factor in how they perceive themselves that they can't get out of their own way to recognize how that their own thoughts are perpetuating this very thing that they're thinking has occurred.
And I think this happens exactly what you're saying so much more frequently, at least in my experience, with women in the business space. Especially the anecdotes. I remember very clearly. So my business partner, Dave, Resolution Creative, resolutionaryworks.com.
So great.
Resolutionaryworks.com.
So great. Go to our website. Look at the photos. It's all Dave.
It is.
He's a magic maker.
He is.
He makes people look real pretty.
He does, doesn't he? He does. He does. He does. I like to work with the best. It's interesting because people often ask us, how did you start your company? And what we do is, and you know this, but for people who are unaware of our company, Resolution Creative, what we do is we primarily work with artists and creative types, and that is construed very broadly, to market and position themselves in an authentic way where they don't have to feel like what they're putting out there, whether it be social media or whatever, is a misrepresentation of their authenticity.
Right.
And when people ask, well, how did you all start? And there's a few answers to that, like any company. But one of the reasons I remember very clearly that there was a voice client of mine who had been referred by one of her business associates. And I went and met with this client to be. And what she really had asked me to work with her on initially when we had talked on the phone was the tone of her voice and the pacing and all these sorts of things. Well, as often happens in that very first meeting that we had, what really came to light was how she works. She is a business owner, an entrepreneur in a field that is 95% male dominated. And the things that she would tell me that these male clients of hers would say to her, the way that she is a very confident person, but she told me, I have this very vivid memory of this one conference that I was supposed to present at, and it was not a keynote, but it was a stage presentation kind of situation. And there was a colleague of mine who was there, and she said, literally, I walked up on stage and handed the mic to I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it because it was all of these men who were out there who had said these things. And I said, well, you know what this makes me think of is it makes me think we need to get you in a space that you own and develop that ethos first.
100%.
Before we get back on stage in a situation that you, quote, don't own. We need you in your space, owning that space. Not only is that going to hopefully engender confidence in you, but it is going to establish your ethos. And I said, this is going to be some kind of video series. This is going to be some kind of thing like that we get out there into the world. That was the impetus for us starting our company and really going down this, what is your authentic voice? And I think, and we say this all the time, including in our online course, on our website. No, but we do say this all the time, which is we just really strongly believe that a lot of people have this existential crisis of trying to find their one authentic self, like there is one authentic version of each of us. There is not one authentic version of any person. That is a brass ring that does not exist.
Right.
And people often feel, and the research shows that we code switch thousands of times a day.
Right.
There's no way that we're inauthentic 999 times that we code switch a day.
100%. 100%.
And so a lot of it is helping people to find those facets of themselves that consistently remain authentic.
Right.
Through those times when we do code switch, right? And when we're in different environments and things like that. And that is so huge. And I think that shows up for so many people in their voices. And so that's the intersection for me of that work as a speaking coach, as a singing coach, all of those sorts of things
Right.
with the authenticity work
100%.
and how you put yourself out there into the world.
Yeah. I mean, just to piggyback on the client story, I also have a client who was in a very male-dominated industry, probably the only female kind of in that world. And so much of the narrative that was being built in her own mind around, well, I don't show up in this way. Like, I'm not a huge, masculine, loud, fast talking person. I'm a lot more analytical, and so then in these moments where they had to do these presentations or these pitches, she was feeling less than because everybody was leaning into this. I talk fast, I speak loud, I've got this like one bullet point, and then, we're good. And it was causing her to feel super insecure about her own leadership in the space. And we spent a massive amount of time identifying, well, what are your strengths? What do you bring to the table? How do you outthink, outsmart, outcommunicate where you are strong, and let that sit there, like let this like persona sit where it sits, but you bring the strength of the analytical mind, the thoughtful mind, the solutions-oriented mind in a way that's going to resonate with them, because they are bullet point people. You can't speak in spreadsheets and too much data, or you're going to lose them. So how do we take your strengths and bring it over here and cause you to stand out, because you do have a unique skill set. You are a leader. They are looking to you. But it was so much was created in her head. We had to bring some of those strengths out to the table so that she could see them, and then figure out, how do we marry what they value with what you have to offer, so that and in and of itself caused so much confidence, so much agility on her end, and the anxiety immediately dissipates when you start to find like where you are and where you stand,
That's it. And I think that's something, again, we've talked all about how we align on everything. But I think part of it is some people, I think, are hesitant to work with people who are going to coach them on presentation and voice and, speaking and all those things. One, because they don't want to confront the thing that they know that they have anxiety around. But number two, I think another reason is because they think that everything is going to be kind of like esoteric, and I think that's something that we, all four of us, I think, all really, really value with our coaching work, is that strategy is not a bad word.
Right.
That we process is not a bad word.
Right.
Strategy is not a bad word.
Right.
We can be very goal directed and specific in the work that we're
100%.
doing. And at the same time, tap into what makes an individual unique in a way that hopefully lets one go of some of the tightness and the vices that we have held ourselves down by, or that others have held us down with.
100%. And it's so easy. It's so easy when those external experiences happen for us to really kind of create like a protection barrier around us, because those things can really be critical moments in our life and in our growth that hinder us from actually being more brave or take more chances because of some of this external stuff. And again, like being a neutral third party, it is somebody who is, looking at it objectively and not in your own subjective brain that looks for every, opportunity to perpetuate whatever belief you've already created in yourself. You were just I have to say it, because you were just talking about the woman that inspired Resolution Creative, and it's really funny because I remember I was probably in maybe my second or third year as an executive at a very large firm, and I remember the CEO coming up to me and asking me to take notes for a executive meeting. And
Mm.
like,
Mm.
and again,
Mm.
I was a grinder. I mean, I think we've talked about this before. Like I busted my ass. I did whatever it took. I took the bad feedback. I got yelled at. I got, brushed under the rug. I got looked over for things, all of those things. And I remember really kind of what that being a pivotal moment in like the career that I had chosen, in the path that I was going down, in like, oh, I'm like kind of a secretary for as a woman executive, which that like can really stop or stunt what you think about yourself and what you think about the career that you've chosen and what you think about like your peers and how they perceive you.
How does it become a self-fulfilling prophecy?
It is.
Yeah.
It 100% could be, right? And I think that, for me, again, why we're here is, things could have been a lot different for me had I had somebody who was like, that was that CEO. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
brush that person aside and like stand
Right.
in your space and like be
Yes.
confident and be authoritative. But I was the daughter of daughter of a military officer. I had a Korean mother. And so like, you get put in your place, and like a natural instinct for me as a human is to go back to my place. Right.
Mhm.
Which is like that's how I needed to continue to show up was, okay, you're the secretary here.
Well, and I think the tricky thing then is too, of course, we all know that there are times for collaboration and being a team player and all hands on deck, et cetera, et
100%.
cetera, et cetera. But then it is being intentional in each of those moments afterward, I think, to take the time to reflect and say what was appropriate about that circumstance.
Absolutely.
What was not, how will I address that or make decisions similarly or differently moving forward?
100%. And I will never say anything bad about a secretary or like an assistant or anything like that, right? Those roles are extremely important.
It's like stage managers in theater.
Stage managers in theater.
100%.
Lord bless
Could not
them.
do it without them.
No. And that, that said, even, I can go back now and objectively look at what that CEO could have been asking me in that moment, which is, we're going to need, an action plan moving forward. You are probably the most capable from an execution or operational standpoint. All of the players here and who needs to be managing or doing whatever the next steps are. But in that moment, the story that I told myself, which could or could not have been true, was I'm a secretary. I am not an executive in this organization. And the reality is I created that narrative. That person didn't give me that narrative. They didn't, yes, it felt just, like looking back, it feels disrespectful, of course. However, there could have been another conversation. I could have very easily asked a question of what is the intention of that question, or what is the intention of that ask?
Mhm.
Is there something that you're wanting me to do with the notes? Like a number of different questions in a non-threatening way to get clarity around what that was. But I created a narrative. I created a massive story around it.
Don't we all?
Yeah, exactly. And the lack of confidence, the lack of security in that moment caused me to go, into a little hole instead of, stand kind of in my own space, right?
Absolutely.
And so the goal of, being able to come in and empower people to have the capability of asking the right kinds of questions and to move past your own limiting beliefs or your limiting thought processes is something I feel very strongly about.
Well, and I think that's another thing that I really appreciate. It's like back pat on all of us day. No. But one of the things I really appreciate about this particular collective of people and the people that we engage with, also beyond our sort of the four of us, is that I think that we all have had such varied experiences in the real world, from like largest firms to nonprofits to startups to places that are very heavily creative leaning to places that are probably very heavily
structured
quantitative
government entities.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that between the four of us, we just cover a really nice gamut of what one might expect,
Right.
whether you're going into an industry slash circumstance for the first time, or you're pivoting from one to another and you're like, hey, I just don't know how I should adjust my process expectations, all those sorts of things, because I think that's always daunting.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I'm proud of the four of us, and again the people we would bring in and work with as well, is just that I think that we don't have a duplicated, we have a nice breadth of background experiences ourselves, of starting companies, of working in different capacities in different companies,
failing, screwing up,
100%, having all of these same things, going to our own coach. I mean, all of these things I think are so important to be able to give other individuals some sort of perspective, which in some ways is maybe the most important thing that a coach could do to kind of bring this full circle is, I don't have to be right, but here's what I can give you anecdotally from my perspective, having been there too.
Right. Well, and I do think, part of some of what we value around like harmony is that, the breadth of experiences or the breadth of the people that we work with all cause us to be more creative. We'll use the word creative again, but creative around how we solve problems and creative about how we say yes and when something comes up and it's a little bit different than maybe what we've handled in the past. I think there is something to be said for just the vast background in comparison to, a rigid, structured, this is how it's always been done approach. Those types of organizations, those types of entities, those types of coaches, those types of leaders, they don't thrive through adversity. They don't thrive through challenges. They don't thrive through, the growing challenges of AI in the world today, right? Like, and I think that, what to your point, what we offer is a creative, engaged, curious, open to improvisation type of individuals to support through whatever kind of adversity comes up.
Resilience and leadership. I mean, it is so critical. And I think you're absolutely right. You have to have those back pocket big wins. You have to have those things in your court so that when the time inevitably comes, that you need to be the leader and the decision maker.
Oh my gosh.
It's there.
It's so true.
It's there for you.
Yeah. It's really funny, Adam, like the past couple of years that I've been doing this, I think about the years and years of experience in, corporate America or like working at the startups or whatever. And I feel like the last 2 years, I guess it's about 2 years that I've been doing this work where I'm working with different businesses, different leaders, kind of spread all over different industries. I've learned more about business. I've learned more about people. I've learned more about leadership in those 2 years than I have the 20 years prior. And the thing that's so interesting to me, and I've said this before, I'm going to say it again, and I'm probably going to die on this horse. Maybe I'll write a book about it. Yeah. Who knows, Adam? We'll see. But the three, you're like the book advocate.
I'm the book advocate.
I know.
I'm the author headhunter. Next career.
I love it. But this concept of every business, every CEO, every leader that I work with, there are three things every single time that is causing a business to stale or to stall. And that is, number one, they don't have a vision or how to execute to that vision. It's not clear enough. Like the vision's not clear enough and we don't have a plan to execute to it.
Too broad, too fuzzy.
Too broad, too fuzzy, or we've got this big vision, we don't know how to do anything. We have no goals around what that vision is. We don't know how to measure what it is that we're doing or trying to do or trying to obtain. We don't have a clear enough product market fit. We don't know who our audience is. Like there's just kind of this bucket of vision, clarity, execution. I would say that's bucket one. Bucket number two, they don't have the right people. They don't have the right people to execute. They don't have the right people in the right seats. They don't have the right organizational structure to execute the vision that they've created. Number three, poor leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what? Leadership is responsible for the people and the vision and execution.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you don't have the right leaders, and I can go down like, the 4 pillars around leadership that have to occur in order for those other 2 things to happen. If you don't have that, if you don't have good leaders, if you don't have the right people, if you don't have vision or execution, it's going to stall. And 95%, 90% of the conversations that I'm having with every leader, business owner, CEO, executive is around one of those 4 things or one of those 3 things.
Is it really?
Every single one. Some of it is a little bit around like self-awareness and human like mental blocks and that sort of thing. And so we do spend time on that, but it's almost always one of those 3 buckets. Isn't that fascinating?
I think it's fascinating, and I think it's interesting how it's both almost sociological and psychological at the same time. Like all of that has to do with things that involve more than one person.
Right. Right.
Even when you say the founder, the CEO, it really is never the.
No one succeeds alone.
Yeah.
Ever.
Ever.
Yeah. And if a CEO or leader is not willing to step back and say, how am I contributing to this mess that's occurring? You've got a bigger problem.
Sure.
And I think there's also one thing to be like, how am I contributing to this problem? Oh, well, versus how am I contributing to this problem? I need to stop and like really take some personal inventory and really like take a look at myself. And I really need a plan of action, a strategy around this before I can start thinking about this.
Sure.
Right.
Absolutely.
And that is a challenge in and of itself.
What do you think makes for the, gosh, how do you even like say a word for this? What do you think, if there were one thing, just absolutely one thing that you think makes for someone who says, I have this really great idea. I think I want to start a venture, whether it's a company or a piece of technology or whatever it is, an invention. What from your experience is the number one quality that person that exhibits potential for success?
No hesitation, curiosity.
Really?
No hesitation, none. I believe that you have to be curious about your product. You have to be curious about who you're going to sell that thing to. You have to be curious about if it's the wrong idea. You have to be curious about if it's the right idea. You have to be curious about the people that you want to get into business with. You've got to be curious about the objections that they're having. You've got to be curious about your own leadership and how your own programming might be the thing that's keeping everything from growing in the first place. You've got to be curious about your beliefs, your values. I mean, the list goes on and on and on.
Your vision, clearly.
Your vision, I mean, the reality is, you can have a really, really, really stellar idea and a stellar vision and get stuck because we don't have the right people or it's not exactly right. And so what evidence are we looking at to cause us to pivot or to adjust, without hesitation, I would say curiosity.
It makes sense to me. It sure does.
Yeah.
And
everything though, Adam, if everybody would just be curious everywhere.
Yeah.
Politics, beliefs,
Isn't
like if we could just be curious, like wouldn't we be so much stronger as humans?
What questions are you asking versus what statements are you making?
Yeah. In our beliefs, like learn, like if we could just be more about learning and less about like, I know.
Isn't that the truth? Isn't that the truth? And that's the thing I think, bringing this back to the voice to some degree, I think the willingness to accept and hopefully eventually even celebrate the journey that is inevitable change. There will be people who will come in and they'll say to me, I just feel like my voice has been changing a lot over the past 5 years or something, right? Now, sure, there could be some kind of like pathology related to that. But much, much, much more often than not, it's, well, right, because hormonal changes and or geographical changes that affect the voice and or the amount of use the voice is continuing to, all of these things, there are going to be changes in our lives that affect aspects of our lives. And I think that everything we've talked about today in some way comes back to a willingness to embrace and celebrate change, to look back on moments intentionally and to either say, yes, I take that path again, or that path's not for me again. And to, forge new woods, revisit the parts of the woods that are beneficial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you have to have clarity to know
And
what to
curiosity.
say yes
Yeah.
or no to. Yeah. Oh, let's end it on
Always
that.
great.
Adam, I love that. Accepting inevitable change.
Got to do it.
That's a hard thing for humans, right?
Gosh, isn't it? We like to stay in our lane. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
The older we get, the more curmudgeonly
That's it.
My booty is in this seat.
That's right.
I'm not moving.
You know it. We can't do that.
That's right. Well, thanks, Adam. This was so much
thank
fun.
you, Leslie. Always a blast.
Love you.
Love
Mucho.
you too.
All right. And thank you for joining us on another edition of And So Coaches Unplugged. Is that what we're calling it? I don't know. Thank you. And please follow us on all major platforms. Tell your friends, and we'll see you again soon.
See you soon.